Okay, hi, I'm Eleanor, and I'm really excited to give this presentation at JS.la. As David mentioned, JS.la consistently has thoughtful and inspiring presentations showcasing what a really great community we have around web development in general. And yeah, I think a lot of the talks are personal, and in a way, every talk we give about code is kind of a personal story. I mean, if we've been there, it's part of our story now. So the topic, for me, the topic of upgrading major dependencies is also personal. This is the kind of talk that I wish I could bring with me in a time machine and present to myself several years ago. All of the tips were learned the hard way by not doing them or not thinking they were worth doing. So the hope with this talk is that you find at least one takeaway from this presentation, whether it's the brass tacks of safe upgrades or the philosophy around who should upgrade and when. So before I get started, I'll introduce myself. I'm a software engineer at a mid-sized fintech company that you can look up on LinkedIn. I've been working on front ends at a handful of small to medium-sized companies since late 2014, primarily React, but sometimes also Polymer, Vue, and good old vanilla JavaScript. My favorite work has always been building designs with charisma, not just the flashy, but the truly compelling, whatever that means for the content. Before that, I made a living as a professional classical musician. I subbed with groups like the Pacific Symphony, Las Vegas Philharmonic, LA Opera. I played clarinet and bass clarinet in several orchestras, operas, film and video game recording sessions. One of my favorites was when I got to play the boss music. That was like the peak of my career, pretty much. Most recently, I am 36 weeks pregnant, which is pretty darn close to having a baby. Most pregnancies last 40 weeks, which, if you're doing the math, is actually 10 months, but it can sometimes be shorter. So I'll try to hold the baby in for at least the duration of this talk. And attached here is a picture of my husband and I 3 weeks ago. I'm actually even bigger now, so brief visual since we can't meet in person. So briefly also, I want to talk about the inspiration for the title of this talk and why I call it Dirty Jobs. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dirty Jobs was a TV series on the Discovery Channel in which the host, Mike Rowe, was shown performing difficult, strange, disgusting, or messy jobs alongside the typical employees. It ran from 2003 to 2012. Some of the most notable jobs were things like snake wrangler, garbage pit technician, sheep castrator, skull cleaner, things like that. And the common ground between jobs like these and upgrading major software dependencies is that the work is extremely necessary, but often underappreciated. Most people don't know how challenging the work is, or even that it exists at all. And when jobs like these are done right, they're invisible to the final consumer. I didn't even know skull cleaner was a job, but apparently it's being done and it's being done well. But when these jobs are done badly or neglected completely, the consequences can be the total collapse of the business. So, as they say, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. So for the next 18 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through identifying the upgrade, campaigning for the work time to start it, next sprint maybe, important things to do before you actually start, setting up your environment for a low friction workflow, some tips while debugging, some hazards to avoid, general thoughts on the cadence of upgrades, and an exercise for the bold. And quick note, this is a JavaScript meetup, so all of these examples will be about the Node and NPM ecosystem, but I'm absolutely certain there's analogs in any language and any ecosystem that uses open source. So, if you happen to be a visitor from the not JavaScript community, just sub in your NPM or your compiler version or engine as needed. So there are a lot of upgrades that are major, but are not really a big deal. These are a few that I've identified as popular packages that are a really big part of our code base that, it hasn't been a big deal to do a major upgrade. And Ping me later if you did have a lot of trouble with one of these. I'm sorry if I'm calling something easy that was hard for you, but in my experience so far, these have been kind of the easy ones. But sometimes it's a really big deal, and you might recognize some of these. Maybe you have some war stories of your own. These are some of the ones that I've encountered that have taken days or weeks and sometimes multiple developers to get going. The fourth one particularly, when your designers have a new style guide, a new component library for your entire app, you can encounter some kind of scar tissue of trying to do this upgrade and hearing people say they were burned by the last upgrade. So there are some kind of social challenges with upgrades as well as technical, which we'll get into. So how do you know which one you're going to get? Are you going to get the easy one? Or are you going to get the really hard one? Or are you going to get something in between? The first thing you should look at is the changelog, which is almost always available next to the repo on our friend GitHub. And if you see something like this, I hope you can all read this. The API is not only completely different, so is the way of thinking about routing in general. You know you're in for the big kind. And if you've waited long enough after this upgrade was released, you might be able to benefit from migration guides or code mods, maybe. But definitely don't skip this step. Look at the changelog. And you might think you can save time by doing a find all for the word breaking. This changelog does not use that word. I almost wonder if the author challenged himself to not use the word breaking in probably one of the most breaking changes of all time. But in any case, take a minute to just check that. Okay, so we know it's huge. And the next thing is to determine, is it worth your time? I mean, honestly, those two they go hand in hand. So these are a few ways you can look at an upgrade: the scope of impact, the security implications, the cost of waiting or doing nothing, the new features, and the performance. I won't read these questions here, but if I can say yes to at least two of them, then it's probably worth our time. A huge exception, of course, is if there's a known high severity security vulnerability in one of your libraries, then this usually counts as enough on its own. On the flip side, if your project is super ephemeral, like maybe you're in advertising or something like that, and it's never maintained, then the cost of waiting section becomes the cost of doing nothing. And you can probably wipe your hands and get a snack because maybe you can skip this upgrade. So the great thing about getting answers to these questions is that you can bring them back to the team when you're pitching them on the upgrade. I can't emphasize enough how important this part is. Whether you're a team lead or a rank and file individual contributor, this is really important for team trust, communication, and most of all, covering your butt in case the upgrade goes badly. If you go rogue and do a really large breaking upgrade without telling anyone outside of the PR title and asking QA to look at this real quick, then you'll make future upgrades more difficult and run the risk of looking like a jerk. And you're not a jerk. You're a thoughtful person who knows the value of communication and collaboration. So you can campaign for the upgrade on Slack, just start a conversation in the right engineering channel or, product channel. Depending on the scope of it, you might want to have one of these face-to-face meetings. For instance, from personal experience, when we were doing the React Router or React 16 upgrade, it was a really easy sell. But a Webpack upgrade at one of my companies took weeks to complete. And it was one of the things that our program manager kind of regretted letting us do. And so in the coming slides, we're going to talk about ways to get through the really hard ones in ways that will make people not regret agreeing to let you do these upgrades. So did you convince them? Yay, awesome. Your team agrees we should do this. And by we, they mean you. You should do this. So it's time to dive in and just npm install, right? Not just yet. These steps will save you a lot of time down the road if you do them before you start. They'll also help level set assumptions about how much time this is going to take. So maybe from the last step, you have the answer to time boxing. But in general, as we do, try to pad it a little bit, give yourself a little bit of time since there's unknowns. If this is your first major upgrade, don't pretend it can be done in an afternoon or while also working on 2 features. It takes real bandwidth. Next, loop in QE or QA, whatever your company calls it, because you're a communicative, collaborative engineer. You already have a healthy relationship with your QA engineer, right? It was on you to identify the impact of the work. So make sure you share it with your testers. I mean, are they going to need to do a complete regression on every platform, every device? Or is this the kind of upgrade that will either work completely or break completely? What's your rollback plan? If is this one of these like there's no turning back kind of upgrades, or do you have a plan for going back? Benchmarking. So if I have any favorite tip in this entire presentation, it's this one. Benchmarks can be used for bragging rights later and building trust for future upgrades. They can also be used as part of your next promotion packet. So we're benchmarking for size and speed. So things like using Lighthouse in Chrome, Webpack Bundle Analyzer, and any other ways that you're currently measuring your service, latency between services, things like that. This is huge. Don't forget to do this. Of course, you can probably go back to develop and benchmark later if you do forget, but keep this one in your pocket. It's great. And lastly, tests. So you have tests, right? Of course you do. But if you don't, maybe it's time to write a few for the expectations that you've outlined. Happy path, a few unhappy path, and try to make them high level enough so they're durable and don't break for silly CSS or copy changes. Okay, so this upgrade is large, worthwhile, your team agrees, you have a plan. Now it's time to start. So this next section is divided into 5 parts. The initial setup, a fun gotcha, a bunch of tips around methodology and general debugging, a few hazards, and a few thoughts about maintenance work in general in the context of the other work we do as developers. So starting with the very, very, very obvious. Someone recently reminded me it's good to state the obvious. So this is the obvious slide. New branch, of course. Here's the not so obvious. This one bit me as recently as this year. So you really should take care of this one before you do anything else with your actual dependencies. More than once I've run into bugs that are related to the new dependency not supporting an older version of Node. And if you look at this chart, if you can see, like, I was bit by the Node 10 one because we were on Node 8, and then our continuous integration was on 10. And if you get this out of the way before installing any new packages, you can avoid going down like meaningless rabbit holes that would have been fixed by just updating the Node version. So yeah, this is an easy but definitely a gotcha. Okay, so after your Node version's up to date, you get to start down what I call your first rabbit hole. And I think it's really important in each rabbit hole to update one and only one thing at a time. But of course, the nature of rabbit holes is that it's one thing that leads to another thing that leads to another thing. So this slide is kind of my suggestion about how to kind of contain the madness of cascading rabbit holes. It's my favorite way to keep track of the messiest part. So start with your first by opening your favorite note-taking app. And lately, I really like using Notion, so plug for Notion. And write a short blurb about the change that you're making, like whatever it is, a bump off package. If and when, and it's going to be when, it surfaces errors that require other changes, and it takes more than 5 minutes, try writing a new blurb about that error, maybe what you've already tried, but indent it so that you have this visual representation of like this, and then this, and then this. So you have a little bit of order there. I really like doing this because it kind of protects me from distraction. If I'm going to get paged or who knows what, someone just taps me on the shoulder. I feel like this is the kind of stuff that would usually vanish in short-term memory, that if I have kind of a note-taking system, I'm guarded against that. So of course, when you resolved it, write a short, sweet commit for each item in the rabbit hole. And yeah, this I think helps me, or has helped me in the past, keep track of where exactly I was. This is just a really great meme that I saw that perfectly captures what it's like to be in the middle of an upgrade. Yeah, I think I saw this exactly in the middle of an upgrade and just laughed so much. So stepping back a little bit, getting your code to behave exactly the same as before and after an upgrade is just debugging. It's frustrating, it's thankless, and at the end of the day, the show and tell is like, look, it's exactly the same, which is only going to impress your fellow developers, unfortunately. Product is not going to get super hyped about that. So general debugging tips are, of course, give yourself breaks. Maybe switch off to reviewing someone else's code if you're stuck in one of these rabbit holes and you're just not getting anywhere. Stand up, walk around, get a coffee, Zoom, hang out, chat with someone for a little bit. Get another perspective. And on the flip side, if someone else is doing the upgrade, try to notice the signs of a coworker bogged down in an upgrade. Like sometimes maybe someone else is working through an upgrade and you might ask, how's it going? And they might say like, oh, I put it down for a few days or weeks. So this is probably a good sign that you should be curious for them and ask them, what is it? What's the current bug? And maybe you can kind of become a rubber duck for someone stuck in that situation. And thirdly, there's this really amazing book called Debugging. And I enjoyed it so much that I taped the rules of debugging from that book onto my work monitor. It's just like, it's there. I should make one for home now. Monitor. It's just like I'm working from home, but I wanted to share these rules of debugging because they're so great and they've helped me out of so many binds. I won't go into too much depth of each of them since this book really warrants a presentation of its own, and I highly recommend it to both technical and non-technical people. But it's a guide for debugging anything, like software, electronics, cars, appliances. Most of these examples are hardware, which makes them really memorable. Like, I think one of them is like debugging a leaky tire or like a window that won't close all the way. But all of these also apply to debugging errors as a result of upgrading packages. So I'm sharing them here. I'll just sort of let you read them. I won't go through them, but the one that I did want to add is I wrote in my 10th rule of debugging, which is check the host file, because like half the time I'm just have my host file pointed at something totally weird, and that's helped me debug a few things. Stepping back again, one of the hazards you can fall into when you choose to make an upgrade too soon is being on the bleeding edge. And you hear this term mostly in tech, and it really drives the point home when you look up the definition. I'll let you read it here. It's not a compliment or a badge of honor. When you upgrade too soon, you're volunteering to be on the front lines of undiscovered bugs, security flaws, and you have zero GitHub issues to reference for the challenges that you face. This is totally fine for your side project at home, but not super advisable to do on the job, in my opinion. Okay, so you did it. At least you think you did it. You're 99% sure you did it. All the errors are gone. It runs, it looks good. Wait for the champagne until QE has given you the green light after the regression test. Next, this is the flip side of the first benchmarking. This is really important so you can share the metrics on how much better you made the code, or if it's a material increase in size. Run Lighthouse, check the bundle size again. Make sure you didn't accidentally make the bundle enormous. That can happen. Make sure you benchmark. And after that, you'll want to take ownership of monitoring the release. Have your rollback plan on hand. If you break the internet, don't release at the end of the day. Don't release on Friday. And the fun part, which is you get to share all of the cool new features your team can use. Maybe your team can use React hooks now, which was an exciting day for our team. Tell product how much you made the app, how much faster you made the app, and how much smaller it is. And then go the extra mile and tell them, oh, when you reduce the load time to less than 2 seconds, we make this much more money. And you want credit for that. You want to brag about that, and you want to make sure your boss knows about it, and you want to save it on your computer where you save accomplishments So this is a perfectly acceptable thing to brag about. A few other thoughts. New developers can do this. Don't be afraid to assign this to junior developers, provided you're able to support them if they get stuck. Don't assign the same person to do this all the time just because they're good at it. It's mostly thankless work, and it should be a shared responsibility across the team. And afterwards, give the person who did upgrade work something fun, something they consider fun after this. Most people do not consider upgrading dependencies fun. So lastly, if you're a glutton for pain, and maybe you actually want to see, you want to practice this, maybe, I don't know. Find any code tutorial from 3 or 4 years ago. And some of these will tell you have to use this exact version of, say, Apollo client or something. But try to upgrade instead. And as a bonus, you could republish this tutorial, of course, crediting the original. And you've put a good thing out in the internet. You're a good internet Samaritan for open source. And other people will benefit from it. And you have yet again another thing to brag about. So that's pretty much it. Thanks everyone for listening.